If you've ever tried to prove your autism during an assessment, this will probably sound familiar. Sometimes in our overzealous autistic preparation, especially before an autism assessment, we can accidentally lead the assessor down a complete rabbit hole. That's exactly what I did when I tried to explain my relationship with routines. After all, routines are a key insight into how an autistic brain works. The problem was I didn't actually understand what autistic routines were. So I took the word far too literally and came back with the most tedious and honestly forced examples. I tried to mould myself around the diagnostic criteria instead of just describing my real life. And the irony is, the truth about my routines was far more interesting than anything I manufactured. Hi, I'm Phil, a late diagnosed autistic older adult, and this channel is about helping autistic adults better understand their own autism through lived experience, reflection, and things I've learned along the way. Okay, so there I sat trying to make my case for being autistic. In explaining what I thought were my routines, I completely missed the actual routines that really do describe my autistic nature. So let's have a chat about how autistic routines fit within the diagnostic criteria, some examples of what that might look like in adults, and maybe some ways to help the autistic person in your life with their routines. First up, let's have a look at where routines fit within the diagnostic criteria for autism. In the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders 5th edition, which is currently the standard used to diagnose autism in many parts of the world, one of the criteria is described as an insistence on sameness, including inflexible adherence to routines or ritualised behaviours, such as distress at small changes and rigid patterns of thinking. Routines may include schedules, sensory accommodations, and routines related to special interests or work. But it's also important to note here that routines are not necessarily the same as schedules. Routines in this sense might be more about how an autistic person structures their life, rather than a series of tasks completed in a specific order, although it can look like that too. It's also worth noting that for some autistic people, a need for flexibility with routines may also be necessary. This might be to accommodate sensory needs or changes in the environment, but it might also be due to co-occurring ADHD, which we'll return to a bit later on. Some examples of what this may look like are as follows. Some of these might sound familiar and some might not, and that's okay. Eating the same meals every day. Doing tasks in the same order. Using the same items, like having a favourite pen, cup or hat for example. Preferring to sit in the same seat at home, school, a place of worship or meeting room. Taking the same route to work or other familiar locations. Needing items to be kept in the correct order. Having collections of items, maybe even lining them up. Needing to know what is going to happen in detail. Needing information to be precise and accurate. Needing clear rules and for everyone to follow those rules. When going to a social event, this might include knowing what food will be available, who will be there, what bus or train to catch, where to park, how long you'll be there, the order of things that will happen, and even scripting conversations in advance. Routines are also closely related to special interests and repetitive movements, or stimming, as they are all part of the same section of the diagnostic criteria. We'll come back to stimming and special interests in more detail in future podcasts. From a medical or diagnostic perspective, these routines are often described using pathologising language, terms like restricted. That may be warranted if routines become so rigid that they significantly affect daily life. But conversely, from our autistic perspective, these routines are also positive. They help us create order, predictability, and a sense of control over the things that matter to us. The autistic brain craves predictability. Routines help us avoid overwhelm, sensory overstimulation, and anxiety. Routines can also help in times of dysregulation, bringing order and calm through that predictability. For me, a shower before my evening meal is a routine that helps me deal with dysregulation built up over the day. Through the sensory seeking of being enveloped in warm water. It's also an important tool I use to transition from daytime to evening, from work to relaxation. The idea of needing help to make this kind of simple transition might seem odd to non-autistic people, but even these everyday transitions can be difficult for autistic people. When our routines are disrupted, we may experience stress, anxiety, and even meltdowns. When routines are disrupted, our nervous system can go into high alert. This is our amygdala firing in response. The amygdala is part of the brain's limbic system and is responsible for emotional processing. It's the amygdala that responds to fear, anxiety, or aggression through our primal fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, which we talked about in earlier podcasts on meltdowns, shutdowns, and fawning. If you haven't yet had a chance to watch those, I'll leave links in the description. So to state the obvious here, when our routines are disrupted, our brain can respond in the same way it would to an external threat or danger. The brains of autistic people process information differently, particularly in areas like planning, organising, and regulating behaviour. This is executive functioning. This can lead to challenges with initiating tasks, transitioning between tasks, and adapting to change. As mentioned earlier, autistic people can also have heightened emotional responses to uncertainty or unexpected change. Routines support executive functioning and emotional stability by providing predictability, clarity of expectations, and ultimately a sense of safety through control. As I mentioned at the start, when I was seeking an autism diagnosis, I focused on some fairly trivial routines, but those are still relevant. Added to that, even after a few years, I'm still unpicking what this looks like for me. So I'll give a few examples here, but this is only a tiny snapshot. I'm not someone with a rigid daily schedule, so my routines are more around individual actions. For example, when I eat a meal, I always finish with a drink. I'll leave some drink in my glass until I've finished eating. So if there's food on my plate but the glass is empty, it's a pretty clear sign I've finished. When cooking, I always do the dishes as I serve the meal and before I eat. As mentioned earlier, I always shower before my evening meal. This helps me separate my day from my evening. When I eat my chicken nugget meal, it's always with the same complementary foods: oven tomato, oven chips, tomato sauce, and a glass of Coke with ice. Yep, I've still got the taste buds of a 10-year-old. This is also the meal I always have on the first night when we go to our holiday shack. In my work as a live audio engineer, my routines are extensive. They cover how I plan before every show, check every piece of equipment, inventory everything I take, plan my travel, and also how I set up and pack down shows. These routines are incredibly time intensive and burdensome, but I see that as a worthwhile trade-off to keep my anxiety under control as I work. Now, autistic people often need routines, but many of us also have ADHD, and this is where routines can start to look inconsistent or even contradictory. ADHD can affect routines significantly. It can feel like a glitch in the matrix, where we follow a routine rigidly and then without warning feel the need to change it. It might look like a routine we rely on suddenly going wrong or out of order as our ADHD brain crashes the party. That disruption might be caused by inattention, impulsivity, or even boredom with sameness. The result can be an internal struggle for control, with the autistic brain fighting for sameness and the ADHD brain pushing for something new. For me, this has meant making mistakes in situations where my routines had previously produced a perfect record. In my earlier working life, people noticed this. One day, I'd do something so unexpectedly out of my routine that my colleagues would stop in surprise. ADHD can also mean being open to changes in routine, as long as the conditions of autistic safety aren't violated. For example, accepting a last-minute invitation to socialise. Normally I'd have routines leading up to a social event, but if I know the people, the location, and that the food will be okay, I might be able to adapt. This autism-ADHD interplay is often where stereotypical autistic expectations break down. An example from my own life is the idea that autistic people always travel the same route. At one point, I drove a colleague to work one day a week on a half-hour drive through city traffic. My colleague was surprised that I almost never took the same route twice. I was constantly finding new ways to get there. That doesn't look autistic at all, but my ADHD was clearly in control, seeking novelty. It can also work the other way around, where autism compensates for ADHD, and this is a big one for me when it comes to my routines. For example, when I leave the house, I have a routine where I say the words 3 things to myself as I'm leaving. I'm referring to my phone, keys and wallet. I physically check my pockets, keys and wallet in the left, phone in the right. This is an autistic routine that compensates for ADHD, helping me avoid leaving things behind. Similarly, when I'm away from home, my phone is only ever in one of 3 places: my hand, my pocket, or my car's charging cradle. I never just put it down, ever. Again, an autistic routine preventing a likely ADHD disaster. So unlike many people with ADHD, I rarely misplace these items, and I have my autism to thank for that. And this brings us back to the idea that all autistic people are different. If someone seems unautistic in certain ways, don't discount their autism. Like me, they may be navigating a constant complex internal interplay with ADHD and other factors. So how might you support an autistic person with very rigid routines without accidentally making things worse? Firstly, if the routines don't cause harm, don't disrupt them. They're likely helping that person manage daily life. Sometimes it can help to have a plan B if routines need to change due to unforeseen circumstances. Some autistic people may prefer to practice a new travel route before an important event or starting a new job, checking timings, traffic, parking or public transport. Supporting this process, or at least not dismissing its importance, can make a big difference. Identifying changes early so alternative plans can be discussed is also helpful. And always include the autistic person in decisions that affect them. Lastly, never disrupt an autistic person's routines for a quick laugh. That reaction might seem funny to some, particularly in the workplace, but when everyone is laughing at one person who is genuinely distressed, that is bullying. The autistic person might appear to go along with the joke, but masking can hide real distress. You may never know the damage being caused. I've worked in the music industry for almost 4 decades, and musos love a practical joke. Now, people who work with me often also have come to understand that I have very particular ways of doing things. That's my autistic routines. Along the way, a few have gone for cheap laughs by messing with my routine in very small ways. Now, they will never know that even that small disruption is dysregulating to me as I work hard to mask my true response. But the vast majority of my long-term clients have learned that despite my quirky way of working, my attention to detail, largely driven by routines, consistently delivers exceptional results. That makes them money and keeps fans happy. So they've learned to let me work in my own way. And thinking back to my autism assessment, it's these kinds of routines that really describe my autism. And this is why, looking back at my assessment, routines were actually one of the clearest indicators of my autism. I just didn't recognise them at the time. Okay, so that's my brief introduction to autistic routines. If there are particular topics you'd like me to cover in the future, feel free to mention those in the comments. And let's chat about what autistic routines look like for you. And if you've been through the diagnostic process, were there areas where you felt you tried too hard to fit the criteria? I'd love to hear about that too. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye for now.